Min
is in Smash now, which means ARMS is relevant enough to make a video about it. SEO, SEO, SEO. ARMS is a strange game. Personally, I really like it. The character designs are cool, the music is fire, and the gameplay itself is silly and fun. Just look at this lad move. But the existence of this game is strange. It never really found its place in the gaming community. It had a relatively quiet release on the last day of E3 in 2017 and was overshadowed by Splatoon like a month later. So there was never really time for a strong community to grow around the game. But even if it had a stronger marketing and release strategy, the game exists in a nebulous gray area in terms of who that community would even be. And that's what we're looking into today. What is the purpose of this game, and why there really isn't a clear audience for it? So what even is ARMS? What makes this experience different from other fighting games? Strange controls and systems aside for now, it's one of the most fundamentally focused fighting games. Discounting the one or two unique abilities each character has, each fight in ARMS really comes down to just three things: spacing, punishing, and reading. No fancy 15-hit combos or wealth of undiscovered tech, just the fundamentals. And let's talk about what these fancy words mean. Spacing is the spatial relationship between you and other objects in the game. In part, this means moving the perfect distance to avoid an attack, but also putting yourself in the perfect position to punish. And punishing is exactly what it sounds like. Taking advantage of a moment where your opponent's guard is down and dealing some damage. It's a risk-reward system that can be over in seconds. And all of this is encompassed in what I would consider the most important of these fundamentals: reading. It's about taking a robust comprehension of the situation, which means knowing everyone's abilities, the stage, the rules of the match, and how your opponent is feeling, and using all that info to anticipate their moves. If your opponent can get in your head and outread you, knowing the sickest combos and the fancy tech mean nothing.
I used to play every now and then with an old friend, and he would get tilted because I would come in, not know like any of the buttons whatsoever, and just beat his ass with just basic paying attention to what he does.
And again, this is where ARMS shines. Your opponent commands the center of the screen because their movements are the most important thing you need to focus on. Aaron Hansen described it best on an old Game Grumps podcast, The G Club.
There was this moment where I was playing ARMS and Susie was watching, and because she was sitting there watching me, I was like, well, I'll describe what's going on. Mm-hmm. So I was talking about how the opponent was reacting to what I was doing, and I realized I don't think I'd be able to do this in King of Fighters or something, how the emotional state of the opponent. But in ARMS I could really feel it immediately. I was like, oh, she's scared now. She was like, this is really fun to watch with you describing it like this, and I was like, oh, that's so weird that there's enough nuance in this game where you can sort of read the opponent's state.
And this makes sense because ARMS is the PvP spiritual successor to Punch-Out. You know, that old NES game that was all about reading the tells of your opponents. Only now, both of you can move freely in a 3D space. And between the slower attacks and the wide camera angles, this information is clear, so you can fight with a proper sense of spacing in mind. And the actual fighting mechanics wrap all this info up with a nice bow, because ARMS is relatively slow for a fighting game due to those extendo arms. The risk-reward system is now the core of the fight. There isn't any safe moves that you can just throw out haphazardly. You can punch with your left, right, or grab with both. But all three of these options leave you open to being punished. It's obviously not a one-to-one exchange where throwing out a needlessly reckless punch guarantees you get hit, because then there'd be no point to the game. But because of this design, ARMS is a phenomenal platform for you to observe and communicate the fundamentals of fighting games with your opponent. And if you're a newcomer to fighting games, this is one of the best games to naturally learn the fundamentals through practice, because that's all this game is. But that's also the problem. That's all this game is. Even though the gameplay does a fantastic job creating space to learn the fundamentals, we're never given an opportunity to apply those skills to a higher level. It's like learning math in school. Yeah, cool, I can solve for the derivative of f of x if x equals 0.2 of fragmentary passage through 58 over 2 days. The point is, you're taught how to use a tool, but you're never given an opportunity to do anything complex with it. Like most people experience with high school math. The 35-hit combos and the fancy tech would be the next logical step. But again, ARMS doesn't have these elements. Once you have a grasp on the fundamentals, matches start to feel the same. The stat rings and the bombs add a little bit of complexity to the fight, but they're just elements that take a strong priority when thinking about spacing. And the same can be said about the boxing gloves you equip. Nothing really requires you to apply your fundamentals in a complex way like it would in Smash Bros. And while we're comparing it to Smash Bros, let's look at the multiplayer aspect. First off, because it's an over-the-shoulder POV, the game has to go into split screen. So now the game just becomes harder to see. And on top of that, even if you've got multiple people in a fight, it's still 1v1, but you can push a button to like fight that guy instead of this guy. The optimal strategy is to target someone who isn't looking at you. At that point, multiplayer completely abandons the fundamentals of the system. And because of that, it lacks the local party element other Nintendo properties have. So now we have a game that feels like it should be for newcomers, but really no place for them to go once they learn the basics. And other game modes don't change much, or they actually make the game worse. The single player campaign is short, and the plot that goes along with it is virtually non-existent. It's not a bad game, but it's by no means the final destination of the genre. So again, I bring it back to the very first issue. Who is this game made for? Honestly, the best answer I could come up with is people who want to spend $60 to play a stepping stone game that can lead to other games. You can build an innate sense of the fundamentals and then go play something where those skills can be applied to do cooler things. But hey, now that you watched my video, you have a grasp of the fundamentals, you can just jump into a deeper fighting game and apply the knowledge you learned here. Unless of course you want to play ARMS because you like the aesthetic. Go ahead, I'm not paid to promote anything. Except of course, Raid Shadow Legends. First off, this video is not sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends, it's just a funny haha. But if corporate entity Raid Shadow Legends did want to sponsor a video and give me some money for fun, I'm not going to complain about that. Okay, Min for Smash. I wanted to do a video on this back when ARMS was relevant, because I think the actual mechanics that make ARMS unique would be very toxic in a game like Smash. And she's not out yet, but I'm not convinced that I'm not wrong. Yeah, so that's really all I gotta say on the subject. Put Yozora in Smash, that'd be really funny. Okay, that's it. Bye.